I do the work that I do because the one person I want to save, I can't. So I might as well try and save everybody else. And the one
Mm.
person that I can't save is my mother.
Welcome to Coffee Break, where we invite you to walk on the path of self-discovery with us. I'm Liz, joined by my co-hosts Fatima and Grace. We're three women from different walks of life, united by our passion for purposeful living, authentic connection, and service to others. Welcome to Season 2, where we are thrilled to introduce you to guests we call disruptors, individuals who faced major turning points in their lives and weren't afraid to challenge the systems around them. They remained hopeful in the face of hardship, paved their own paths, and positively inspired others along the way.
I am a hyper-independent person, but learning how to journey with other people has been the greatest lesson and greatest love of my life.
Today's guest is Samantha Stern, a facilitator, trainer, and coach with over 2 decades of experience in organizational development, leadership and personal empowerment, team effectiveness, and diversity, equity, and inclusion. As the founder of Journeys to Remember, Sam designs and facilitates transformative learning experiences that provide opportunities to reflect, reconnect, and rediscover. At the heart of her work is the belief that all change starts with the self and ripples out to the wider world through families, teams, organizations, communities, and societies. As a result, Sam's approach to transformation focuses on bringing both individuals and systems back into greater wholeness, or remembering. In this episode, Sam peels back the layers of her personal evolution and reflects on the emotional challenges of midlife and parenting. We discuss the power of collective healing and the importance of holding space for both joy and pain. She shares how her experiences have shaped her approach and commitment to personal and systemic transformation. Sam's story inspired us to embrace our own value and purpose, and we hope it does the same for you. Make sure you hit the follow or subscribe button so that you're updated on our latest episodes. Enjoy today's conversation.
Welcome to Season 2 of the Coffee Break. We are so grateful that you decided to take some time today and listen along. And we invite you to sit back, maybe take some notes. Hey, you might hear some things that are life-changing for you, and grab a cup of coffee or tea or your favorite beverage. My name is Fatima. I'm a mother of 5 children. I have a background in sales and education. And what's most important to me right now is figuring out ways to bring together good, kind-hearted people who want to make a difference in the world. And so I'm so blessed to have the opportunity to be a part of this podcast. And we've had some phenomenal guests this week and this season. And so we have a lot more to come.
Hi, everyone. My name is Liz. I'm a co-host on this podcast. My background is in women's reproductive health education, and I connected with Fatima over wanting to really connect good-hearted people and share our stories. And I'm excited that our guest is also someone who I almost instantly felt connected with just in hearing her story about how she grew up to be somebody that is very service oriented and has a heart for people as well. So we're really excited today and look forward to the conversation.
You know, Liz, every time you talk about how we got connected, I can't believe that this random encounter turned into us doing a business together, which turned into us doing a podcast together, which is turning into something maybe very super exciting with our guest today. And so when you feel drawn to somebody, obey it. You never know why somebody has been put in your life, and you never know why you were put in their life. And so I've always heard people say, you know, when you put 2 minds together, you have a mastermind. But I like to think of it as if you put 2 hearts together, you have a master heart, because it's really about people who are like-hearted. So I am so excited to introduce Samantha Stern, Sam Stern, because she's one of the people that I met long ago, over 30 years ago now, I believe, who really, we were in the right place at the right time, the right opportunity to connect. We met at my second job out of college. I was wet behind the ears. It was a very fast paced, exciting job in Washington, D.C., where we were dealing with politics and government and community service. We traveled, and it was a new idea that the president at the time wanted to grow. And so there were a lot of brand new college students who had graduated working together, and you could feel our passion and our zeal. And so Sam took me under her wing and she taught me all the ropes. And we didn't work long together, but we've had a lifelong friendship. She's a mother. She's a trainer, a coach. She's extraordinarily thoughtful and kind. And she's been doing some major work with working in what's going on in South Africa. She'll tell us more about that because she did go to South Africa after being in the United States. So thank you so much for coming on. Tell us, how did Samantha Stern, Sam, come to be?
Well, first, thanks, Liz and Fatima, for having me on the podcast. I've been really looking forward to this. I think this is just such an amazing platform for people to share their stories and to touch each other in such powerful and meaningful ways. So thank you for having me. What a question. How did Sam Stern come to be? It's funny, I was sharing with you earlier how I had been reflecting on the questions, and this question is so multi-layered. So I think I'm going to try to touch on a couple of different layers. I think the first layer goes back to just what I can remember as a child. And I think it has to do with just wiring, how we're all wired slightly differently, right? So from the time I think I was like 3, 4 years old, I was rescuing kittens and, broken birds. I think that there was something in me that was very much drawn to, I was going to say brokenness, but I don't know if it's brokenness or if it's those of us who are less fortunate, those of us who are troubled, those of us who are needing support, but just very much drawn to animals, people, spaces where there was real struggle. And that was from a very, very early age. I think as I grew older and I started to read more and learn about politics, because I did study social sciences, psychology, I also studied international affairs. So as I started to learn more about Marxism, socialism, different systems in the world, different ways in which economies work, I started to have a lot of questions about how do we have people with so much and people with so little, right? And that doesn't seem right. So fairness, justice were huge themes for me. I was really drawn to, and I wanted to make fair and just and make right. And I felt very much like people had a responsibility, and I couldn't understand why others didn't feel the same way. So I struggled my whole life with those kinds of questions. And I think delving into reading materials and learning more was my way of trying to wrap my head around some of that stuff. But I also felt like that was very heady, and it didn't allow me to sort of work through in my own body what I needed to work through and take responsibility and be on the front lines and fight for justice. So at the same time, I was also doing a lot of community service myself. It felt as though service was the way for me to connect with myself, the way for me to connect with others, the way for me to give back. I don't know, it was just that there was a big joke amongst my friends in graduate school, and I may have told you this before, because I was constantly doing community service projects on the weekends. I was at this homeless shelter or that river cleanup or, this Habitat for Humanity project. So the big joke on Fridays would be like, whose toilets are you cleaning this weekend, Sam? Like that was the big joke. But the joke was on them, because coming out of graduate school, I got a job at the Corporation for National Service, who was exactly looking for those type of people, as you said,
Right.
Fatima. They were looking for young professionals who had passion and dynamism and commitment and who were passionate about service. So yeah, that was a big thing for me, was to realize, oh, I don't have to do this as a volunteer on the side. This is actually a real job, right? Like service is a profession. So I think that's part of it, right? Like I was kind of wired that way. And I think maybe connected to that, and it might be a sub layer of that, is personality stuff, right? Like the wiring and the personality styles. Since then, I've learned more about my personality style. And I think personality styles do play quite a critical role in sort of how we are and what motivates us, and also what can get in the way, right, of us becoming more whole and more full and, yeah, reaching our potential. So the particular personality style tool that I've been working with recently is the Enneagram. And I'm a 1 on the Enneagram. So the thing that motivates a 1 on the Enneagram is justice and doing the right thing and responsibility and fairness, right? And then I had a really, I was going to say powerful, but it was both powerful and painful turning point shortly before I left the Corporation for National Service. And I think it might have been, I might have met you already. I was one of the team members who was part of a leadership development program for young people like us, right? So it was like this leadership development program for people who were passionate about service, young service leaders. And very early on in this program, we all sit around the fire, and it's, all very, touchy-feely and, expressive. And the question was, why do you do the work that you do? And of course, my head starts going immediately to like justice and fairness and, Marxism and, movements of liberation. And, I'm thinking all of that, and my head is on fire and I'm getting all excited. And I can talk about how, I've built houses with Habitat for Humanity and, working alongside homeless people and the meaning and the purpose. And all of a sudden, as each person was sharing, something was happening for me where I was somehow losing connection with this theory of why I do this work, or why I do the work that I do. And something so physiological was happening for me. My heart was beating, I was sweating, I was having trouble stringing a sentence together. Even now, I'm getting a little bit like tongue-tied because I can feel almost the physiologicalness of it. And then by the time it came to me, and I think I might have been the last person to share, because I was becoming so discombobulated and dysregulated. And when it finally came to me, I opened my mouth and kind of my body took over. And I heard myself literally say, and it was a bit like an outer body experience. I heard myself say, I do the work that I do because the one person I want to save, I can't. So I might as well try and save everybody else. And the one person that I can't save is my mother. And it was such a turning point for me, because I think it connected me with a much more honest reason for why I was doing what I was doing. And I think it began a journey for me of recognizing the dangers in thinking that we can save other people, and the dangers in thinking that we have the answers to somebody else's dilemma. I think it started me on a very real recognition that the only person who could save my mom was my mom. And the only person I was responsible for saving was me. Maybe just to note, just because I think when we don't fill in some of the blanks, people fill them in themselves. So I'm just going to fill in a few of the blanks. I'm not going to talk too much about it. But my mom had had a very hard life growing up herself. And then I think had a very complicated relationship with my dad. And then I think had experienced some real challenges. Leaving the UK, my family emigrated to the US. My dad was American, my mom was British. Leaving her homeland, her family, her comfort zone, I think was very difficult. Anyway, there were other things that were complicated. But I think the thing for me was that I've known many, many people in my life who have gone through terrible traumas and have managed to still find joy and move through their trauma and heal. And in my family experience, I didn't see that happening for my mom. I saw a real heaviness of pain and trauma and hurt and woundedness that didn't seem to lift. And so I think a big part of my life, I tried real hard to make her happy in lots of different ways. So if I just be a really good kid, maybe that'll do the trick. If I be really, really accomplished at school, maybe that'll do the trick. If I'm really, really, hyper independent and responsible, maybe that will do the trick, right? That'll take some of the burden off her. And nothing seemed to work. And so my mom is an amazing woman. She's artistic, she's creative, she's an incredible artist, and she's incredibly feeling oriented. She feels things very deeply. However, that feeling things very deeply tends to make her feel more disconnected from people and misunderstood and, alone and isolated than connected to people. And so, for whatever reasons, some of which I've mentioned and others that I still don't fully understand, that's sort of part of my mom's journey. And growing up with that, with being hyper responsible and must do things right, all of that sort of converged to create this person who was hyper fair, justice, responsibility, rightness oriented.
Wow, thank you so much for sharing that. Even at that young age, for you to recognize that in yourself, I think is really powerful, because it's a lot more painful to self-reflect a lot of the time and really get to the real deep or painful, honest reason why we do the things that we do, why we behave in certain ways, what beliefs we hold in ourselves, the truths that we have. Yeah, I don't know. It's, Sam and I haven't really known each other very long, but as you were sharing your story, I was like, wow, I'm so proud of her. I feel like I can relate in a lot of ways too. Especially when you said that you recognized that it's not your job and you're not the one to solve all the problems in the world and heal your mom, and that you're not responsible for that you're responsible for yourself and your own healing and journey, I think really struck me, because I feel very similarly with my own family a lot of the time. I think for people who have very strong beliefs, we have very strong and solid truths within ourselves, to see that not play out or manifest in the people that we care about can be very difficult and challenging. So thank you for sharing that.
And Liz, I think you just touched on it so like bullseye. It was that sense of helplessness that was motivating me to get out there and build houses and clean rivers and serve soup. And I mean, I felt those things were important too. But when I got real honest with myself, there was such a sense of helplessness.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I am curious, even if you felt that the motivation for the work that you do, or the reasons that you were peeling back your own layers, have changed and evolved, how did you see it connecting into the work that you're doing now?
Yeah. That's the juicy stuff, right? So again, it wasn't a moment, right? It was over many years, and the evolution of the process. I'm going to describe it as if it was a moment, but it wasn't a moment, and I want to be clear about that. So I had been working at the Corporation for National Service, I think for about 3.5 years. And it really was one of the most amazing, fulfilling, growing experiences of my life. I absolutely loved it. I did feel as though towards the end of my time there, and one of the reasons that it was time for me to move on was that my job was becoming much more oversight oriented. So, as grant makers, the Corporation for National and Community Service was a grant making, a government grantor of national and community service projects. In the beginning, we had been a lot more hands-on, and so working with the community organizations and looking at what works, what doesn't, and really
Meeting
sort of
the people served, meeting the
yes, and meeting the community members and
right,
looking at the
right,
ways
right.
in which, right, the ways in which the service programs had impacted their lives. And it was super exciting and invigorating and inspiring. And not that the work behind the scenes was any less important, but I wasn't feeling as connected to the grantor oversight role, which was a lot of report writing, a lot of monitoring and evaluation, a lot of reading of funding proposals and, assessing those funding proposals. And I really felt as though where I thrived personally, but also where I think I had the most to contribute was more hands-on. So working with community-based organizations. So a few years prior to my working at the Corporation for National Service, I had gone on a little bit of I don't want to be offensive or sacrilegious when I say it, but it was a little bit of a pilgrimage for me to
Mm-hmm.
South Africa for two reasons. It was that kind of journey for me. One was that I had watched the elections from a distance, and I had actually been volunteering at a high school in like Southeast Washington, D.C., and we had been monitoring the elections and really looking at, political systems and what this means and, that type of thing. And so it felt as though this was in 1994. The elections had just happened, and I felt like I needed to have my feet on the ground, like I just needed to touch the soil kind of thing. And then the other thing was that very, very sadly, about in 92, I think it was, or 93, a friend and colleague of mine who I had just started becoming friends and colleagues with had then gone to South Africa on a Fulbright fellowship, Amy Beale, and she had been murdered in a township amidst sort of political violence. And there was something that was really sore in my heart that I needed to attend to. And it felt as though I needed to be on the ground in order to do that. Yeah, whatever that meant, I just sort of knew it wasn't going to happen if I was sitting in Washington, D.C. So I went on my own sort of little personal journey, which was exactly what I needed and more. It did everything that I needed it to do. And what it also did was convince me in a very just knowing way that I would be back to South Africa. Like I didn't even have to really think about it or worry about it. I just really knew. And one of the things that had really struck me and made my heart very, very sore while I was there was all the unemployed young people, particularly young men, sitting on the side of the street, just sort of waiting for work. And thinking also then about the infrastructure that needed developing, schools that needed building, libraries that needed building, bridges that, roads that needed fixing. And that was very much what Fatima, you and I had been involved in at the Corporation for National Service. We were involved in projects that were about taking man and woman power and people power and using it to build infrastructure, to teach children, to build communities. So one day you and I think we were sitting together and I was showing you something and you looked right at me and you said, Sam, I get the feeling that you're not going to be around here for much longer. And I said, you're right. Is it that obvious? And you said, no, don't worry. It's not obvious. I can just pick it up. And I said, this is an amazing place. You're so, it's so great that you're here. You're so lucky to be here. But I feel as though I need to be of better use somewhere else. And I need to get back into sort of the trenches and on the ground. And you looked right at me and you said, no holds bar. What would you do and where would you go? And I said, I would go back to South Africa and I would work with a youth service corps. I would get young people engaged in service to their communities, because that's what I think could really be powerful and meaningful, amongst many other things.
What I want to say about Sam that was so marvelous at the time is that I'm a Muslim. And so I'm Black, I'm a Muslim, of course, I'm a woman. And at that time, I covered in a very traditional way. So there was nobody anywhere I went that looked like me. I was like walking poster child, conservative Muslim woman. And I never for once felt like Sam didn't see the person that I really was. One of the reasons why I was able to keep going was because Sam just, hung with me, taught me. I never felt like I was different, or the pat on the head that you sometimes get when you're not of the dominant culture. And so when you told me that you had something else was bubbling up inside of you, I remember thinking, oh, I'm going to be here kind of like alone. But not for a second did it want me to just diminish what you had next. And I remember being very excited for you. And you listened to that inner voice. And how soon after that did you leave for South Africa? Can you recall?
Yeah. So when I said that to you, when I said I would go to South Africa and be part of a youth service corps, it was the first time that I was saying it out loud. And I think within weeks, I got a phone call randomly a phone call transferred from the front desk. And the guy who was on the other end of the line said, I don't know if I've been transferred to the right person, but I run an international development organization and I'm looking to start a youth service corps in South Africa. Can you tell me who I should speak to? Are you the right person? And I said, you sure? I sure am the right person.
Wow. That's amazing.
Unbelievable. Manifestation. And you know what? I think that when you are in line with your purpose, when you are speaking from a place that your heart is saying, this is what you need to do, I think the universe moves mountains. It conspires in your favor. And I have experienced that my whole life, even now, especially now.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. So these turning points, right? Like having that realization that I can only save myself, and that I can't save anybody else, got me thinking about, well, what can I do, right? And what can I do to save myself? And how might that be of service to others, right? And I think being in South Africa was also a really amazing reminder that I was not here to save anybody. So here I was from the West in Africa, doing work that was very service oriented, working with youth development, working with community development, and having to be very mindful of my rank, power, and privilege, that rightly or wrongly, or whether I liked it or not, or wanted or not, it was bestowed upon me. It was the dawn of democracy in South Africa, people figuring out how to be with one another in a different way, and just being very mindful of my rank, power, and privilege. That was one of the things, the assumptions that came along with being white, being foreign, being from the West. So I think that even heightened my cautiousness and my awareness of not falling into this trap of thinking I'm a savior. Even when people treat you as if you are a savior, right? And so having to constantly remind myself, but along the way, or actually, I'm trying to wean myself off, and along the way, a couple of things that really stand out as touch points. One is learning about what it means to really grow, right? What does it mean to grow and develop as an adult? And one of the things that I was really touched by is two of the things I was really touched by was the work of Viktor Frankl, who talks about between the stimulus and the response is a space. And in that space lies our freedom to choose our response to that stimulus. But in our choices lie our freedom and our growth. And that just really has stayed with me and has touched me. And I think my own understanding of it has evolved over time. So my own learning and growth is about how I choose to respond to things, to situations. Even choosing to try and rescue my mother was a choice, right? And choosing to go clean toilets and serve soup and getting clear about what are the things that motivate those choices. So sure, my personality style and being in default mode can absolutely influence my choices. So can my values and my principles. So can mindfulness. So can self-awareness, being aware of some of my pitfalls, being aware of some of the challenges of being a one on the Enneagram, or, being a white person in an African country with rank, power, and privilege. So being that much more mindful and just being more aware of the fact that we all have choice. And I think it was also the work of Stephen Covey, who built on the work of Viktor Frankl and talks about the 7 habits and being proactive and all of those things that just really touched me, and learning more about leadership development and different ways of thinking about leadership and different ways of being in the world, I found really exciting. Because what that meant was I could focus on saving myself. I could focus on growing and developing and freeing myself, right? And then I think a beautiful thing happened in the sense that I started to realize, sure, that's how everybody can save themselves, right? They can save themselves by knowing themselves better, by understanding themselves better, by understanding the world around them better, by understanding how relationships work and relationship dynamics work. Then they can make more informed choices, right? So the more information that they have and the more things they know, the more informed choices they can make. The work I do now, which is around leadership development, diversity, equity, and inclusion, psychosocial wellness, is a direct result of that learning curve and trajectory that I shared with you, because I started to realize that maybe what my role was not about saving anybody. It was about creating spaces where people could learn more about themselves, more about their teams, more about their organizations, so that they could make more informed decisions and choices that could save themselves, right? And so that is very much the work that I do in the world. It's not as service oriented per se. I work with youth organizations. I work with communities. I also work with big corporates. I work because my feeling is that people need those spaces no matter where they are and what they're doing.
In talking about that heart and your next step in working with youth, I don't know if you feel comfortable sharing or not, but it's okay if you're not. I know you have a youth of your own, and and you are in a transition period of your life right now, and I'm sure that you maybe alluded to it before, but learning a lot in this period of your life. And I wonder what that's been like for you, just being newly empty nester as well, and navigating this new time and different family dynamics maybe.
Thank you for that question, because it's very much about where I'm at right now. So my son has just finished high school. We call it matriculating. So he just matriculated in December. Our school year runs from January to December. So he just matriculated 6 months ago in December, and he's taking a gap year. And part of his gap year, he is in the UK. So it's the first time in 18 and a half years
Wow.
that this single mama and her baby, her cub, have been apart really for more than a couple of weeks, when he's gone on holiday with other family in other parts of the country. So it's a very transitional part of my time in my life. I'm not going to lie, there are some real upsides to this part of life, as well as some of the missing and emptiness and redefining and all of that.
Right.
Yeah, there are some real upsides. I'm just going to say that. But one of the things that I have really come to appreciate about myself and have really begun to cultivate is I don't struggle alone at all.
Mm.
If I am struggling with something, I assume that other people are struggling with it too. And I bring those folks together because I believe in collective wisdom and I believe in collective healing. So I do not struggle alone. And I think it is a very African thing as well, right? And I think it's something that has really been nurtured for me and in me by being on this continent and in this country. This notion of Ubuntu, I am because you are, right? We are humans because of each other. Our lived experience is a direct reflection of each other and the roles we play in each other's lives. So yeah, I don't believe in struggling alone. And just a couple of examples, during COVID is when this concept crystallized for me, but I think it's something I've been playing with for a really long time. So during COVID, as a freelancer and an independent consultant and a facilitator, coach, trainer, you can imagine that all of our work just stopped immediately when we went into lockdown. For myself and many of my colleagues, it just meant that our income stopped immediately, all of our work. And we were really in quite a panic. And as I said, I don't like to struggle alone, or be in trauma alone. So I started pulling people together, my closest colleagues and associates that I worked with started, I think it was, it might have been every couple of weeks or every month, I can't remember, but coming together and talking and reflecting and whinging and moaning and crying
So for our
about.
American audience, whinging is whining.
Yeah, absolutely. So
I got that.
and just really talking, reflecting on how we were doing, right? And how scared are you? Oh my gosh, you won't believe this. And you know, and something so interesting started to happen as we came together in our trauma, right? In our triggered state of fight, flight, freeze, fawn and all of that. We in all of our anxiety and our stress and our fears, as we started to share with one another, and as we started to listen to one another and reflect back and witness each other's journeys and stories and pain, and validate each other and our stories and our pain and our hurt and our fear, we started to move from our triggered state into our wise state. We started to move into our thinking brain, where we were actually able to get creative and innovative and clever and what can we do and proactive, right? And make informed choices about how we wanted to be. And out of that time grew what I called flocking circles. So in addition to fight, flight, freeze, fawn, there's also flock, which is where we come together. And by being together, we are safer physically and psychologically because we can reflect and process together. And because we are safer, then we are able to start to get into proactive mode.
I
Yeah.
love that. America, we don't have, as you know, because you lived here, that whole system. And so one of the things we always talk about on the podcast is the fact that we were not raised to identify our needs. If we had them, they weren't necessarily validated. And as big grown adults now, we're still getting in touch with what our needs are, validating them, and then asking for help. So I love the fact that you say that you don't struggle alone. When you said that, I didn't quite understand what you meant. And now I'm like, oh, okay. So whenever you find yourself, you know that you don't struggle alone, that somebody else is going through it too. So you find your people in that season or in that circumstance to help you with that. That's
Yeah.
amazing.
Or even people who've been there and done that and come out of it, right? And
Right,
have
right, right. I
lessons to
love that.
share with
Yeah.
us. Yeah. And Fatima, in many ways, I think what you and Liz are doing is flocking. These podcasts are flocking, right? You're bringing
Okay.
people together to share and to talk and to yeah, to give you a glimpse into my journey, because my journey is your journey, right? And so we'll find places of connection to each other. And maybe if I can add something. So as I said, all of this sounds as though it's like, oh, it all happened in a minute, right? But this took 30 years.
Mm-hmm.
And about like I think it was maybe even 6 or 7 years ago, I started this initiative. It's sort of all of my work falls under the umbrella of what I call journeys to remember. And because I believe that learning is a journey, and there's lots of different ways to learn. There's ways to learn through a textbook, and there's also ways to learn in a flocking circle, right, or from a podcast. But the notion of remembering, and remembering has a lot of different ways of being in the world. So you can remember something, right? You can like remember somebody's birthday, or you can remember an event. But there's also remember as in remember. So to dismember is to disconnect, is to tear apart. So remember is to bring back together, to bring back into greater wholeness. So all the work that I do is really about journeys to remember, to bring people, teams, organizations, communities back into wholeness, not because I have a magic formula. The magic formula actually is letting the person, the community, the team, the organization see more of themselves, right? To learn more about themselves, to reflect, to reconnect, to rediscover about themselves, each other, the environment, the land, the community, and from that place be able to make more wholesome decisions, because it's informed by a more whole understanding of oneself. So bringing oneself and one's team back into wholeness. So this notion of
Wait,
remember.
shameless plug. I have
Yeah.
taken her all 10 of her. She has many sessions, but she has some modules. 10 of them. Shameless plug is going to be down below in the commentary, so that you know where
Thank
to
you.
find her, how to sign up, because it's one of the best trainings that I've ever taken. And you meet people from all over the world, and it helps you to test your hypothesis and your perspective against what other people are thinking. And at the end, you do feel like there was a tremendous shift in mindset and in the heart too.
Oh, thank you for that. And I think, in fact, that was one of the beautiful things that came out of lockdown, is once we got out of survival mode and into thriving mode, it was like, hey, this is an opportunity to do something we've always wanted to do. So my partner Zed and I, we started this diversity, equity, and inclusion training of trainers program. DEI work is really hard. So again, I don't want to struggle alone. Let me bring other practitioners together who are doing this work. Zed and I, when we started doing this work like 30 years ago, Zed even longer, we didn't have a community of practice where we could go and lick our wounds and compare notes and talk about what's working and what's not. So we've created, through this Training of Trainers DEI program, that community for other practitioners. And my sense is every single human being is a practitioner of DEI. Whether you like it or not, whether you want to be or not, if you're engaging with another human being, you are a practitioner of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So thanks for that shameless plug. I'll add to it.
I love hearing about the work that you do with Journeys to Remember. And I am sure our audience will take the time to look at all of the programs that you have to offer and how it's making a difference. I am curious and wondering if you're seeing anything maybe specific now with your work, maybe in the industry, in the world, that you're seeing as your greatest challenge at the moment.
Before I answer that, Liz, I just want to go back because I feel like I left out a piece that you were asking me about being in this stage of my life.
Oh, yes, please.
So, because this is also really important. So as a woman in menopause, I've started a flocking circle for women in menopause because I don't like to struggle alone, right?
Okay.
So in this flocking circle, it meets monthly online. It's women from all over the world. I must admit, it's largely folks in my South African network, but we have folks joining us from all over the world. And it's women talking about our physical body changes, the fact that our children have, flown the nest and what that's like, dating in midlife, financial planning in midlife.
Dating in midlife.
Yes.
Are you dating right now, Sam?
I am. I certainly am.
Can we take a little jump
over? Slowly but surely.
Okay,
I want to get back to Lizzie's question. We'll come back to your question. But Liz, I did want to mention that. We'll get there.
Okay.
So this thing about menopause, like being in this stage of my life, I am rediscovering, I am meeting new women, I am making new friends, it is fantastic. I feel more vibrant in this stage of my life, and it's because I'm not journeying alone, right? I'm doing it with other people. I've learned so much about my body. I've learned so much about hormonal
Well, you look wonderful.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I feel wonderful. Thank you. I really feel wonderful. And I had a tough year last year, health-wise and physical-wise. So this year, just like making changes to my self-care regimen. I mean, it's just, yeah. And that self-care includes in many ways being with other women and being with other people and not suffering alone. Okay, so back to your question, Liz. So
well, before we get to my question, I just want to say I really love that. And I will say very transparently, when you first said, I don't struggle alone, my mind went to, I don't struggle with being alone. And I was internally nodding in agreement. And I think I could kind of see it in Fatima too.
Right. I thought she meant something else too. I was like, yep, right up my alley. We're accustomed to doing this alone. Yep.
We're just like, yep, we're in it. Just,
And then when you said that, I was like, oh.
Yeah. So I just wanted to acknowledge that because I think, yes, in this process of flocking, I realized, oh, yeah, I don't want to struggle alone, even though it has felt that way up until this point or, a lot of the time. So I really wanted to acknowledge you saying that and yeah. So thank you.
Oh, that's so powerful, Liz, because actually, even as you were saying that, I was thinking, I love being alone. I love my own company, and I actually need to be alone often to recharge. In my work, I come off very extroverted, but I'm actually a bit of a closet introvert, and I really need to recharge by myself. So I cherish time alone. Second of all, I am a hyper independent person. I think I've spoken to some of that, and that's one of the patterns in my life that has both been a blessing and a burden, right? That hyper responsible, hyper independent. but learning how to journey with other people has been the greatest lesson and greatest love of my life, actually, because it feeds the time that I am alone, right? It gives me things to think about and it grows me in huge ways. Fatima, I see you leaning in. Go for it.
How do you know who to journey with?
Yeah, I think that's the beauty of being this age. Am I allowed to swear?
Yeah, you can say what you want,
Please speak freely.
right?
The beauty of being this age is I don't give a shit what other people think about me. So
Okay.
I think part of it is I know pretty quickly if I'm gonna connect with somebody or not. And often it's more about whether they like me or not, right? Like I'm not everybody's cup of tea. I'm quite opinionated. I have very strong feelings about things. Quite frankly, if you are not caring about some of the things that I care about, like social justice, racial justice, climate change, what's happening in the Middle East, what's happening in Darfur, what's happening in the Ukraine, like if you don't care about those things, then you're not my person, right? Like, unfortunately, or actually, fortunately. So I think for me, I can tell very quickly if we're gonna connect or not. I am not worried anymore if I'm not somebody's cup of tea or if they're not mine. I think Liz, you said something earlier. I think about sort of trusting that we come into each other's lives for reasons, and I really trust that the people who come into my life for a reason, and if they choose to stick around, it's for a good reason, and if I want them to stick around, it's for a good reason. I really trust my gut. And I really trust the universe. The universe has never let me down. Yeah. How do you know?
I will say, at least for me, I really, and I'm learning more of this lately, is leaning into that intuition. I think I personally, I grew up a lot of the time being told, don't be so emotional. So I tend to dim my intuition, which is more feeling, I think, oriented, and try to look at things very objectively and logically. But at the end of the day, I always realize my intuition was right. And I think tuning into that more and trusting myself more, I don't think that's let me down. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think what we're talking about now is very relevant to the whole being an older woman dating, after putting so much time, attention, and energy into our kids. And now we have the bandwidth and the, capacity and the desire to want to date. And so, like, how do you know who to journey with? Not just with the flock of women with your career, but when it comes to dating. And I know that you told me that you have made some forward movement, and I'm going to talk in code so that you can share what you'd like to share.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, you know what? It was really funny. I was telling a friend of mine this last night on a phone call, and she messaged me this morning and said, "Damn, Sam, you sounded so free and so like liberated." So the thing I was sharing with her that I am loving about dating right now, and don't get me like, I am so new to this, right? It's been like 15 years since I've been out there, even longer. And I've literally been on, I think, 5 first dates and 1 second date. So I am still very new to this. But what I am loving and what feels very different from how I dated in my teens and 20s and 30s even is back then, I think my focus was on whether they liked me. And I wasn't thinking so much about whether I liked them. And I think I just assumed that I'd turn them into what I liked, right? I'd change them, I'd mold them, but I was more worried, do they like me? What I'm finding now as I'm sitting meeting a new person, and I usually know in the first 2 minutes if I want to spend, and so I've also gotten very clever. I do not meet for dinner for a first date. I meet for a coffee, because then I can be at, or a pastry and coffee, because then it's a win-win. Who doesn't like pastry, right? Like that's like my opportunity to have a pastry. So even if the date goes terribly, I still got a really nice donut or a really nice pastry, right?
It's easier to digest too.
Yes. So then, so I found that while I'm sitting there getting to know this new person, I'm really thinking, do I like this person? Would I want to spend my precious time with this person again? My time is incredibly precious to me. So yeah, so that's a huge shift that's happened. And what I have found, of these 5 dates, 3 out of the 5, the answer is yes, I would really like to spend my precious time with these 3 people again. One I have, and I'd like to spend time with them again. And another one, it's sort of on the fence. We're sort of struggling to find this second date thing, and maybe that's a good sign that, you know, it shouldn't be this hard, and let it go. But I think I'm surprised that out of 5, 3 of them, I can honestly say I would enjoy spending time with them again.
They actually, have made it to the next round.
Yeah,
Well,
exactly.
one of the things I think that has come to me about men and women and how I heard this a long time ago and I didn't get it. And I think it fits into what you just said. Men marry or date for a woman to never change. A woman dates or marries for a man to change. So we're looking at the potential of what they could be.
Right.
And they're looking at who we are right now, and who we are right now, they want us to remain. So if we start making, midlife changes, or after the kids, or we don't want kids, whatever it is. And so being able to sit back and be objective and say, this is who I am, and I don't really give a shit about if you like me or not.
Right.
And this is who you are.
Yeah.
And being objective, am I trying to fit a square into a round hole, a square peg into a round hole? Or is it somebody that I want to spend my precious time with? So that's the beauty of age and wisdom.
Yes. And the other piece of that is, I'm also feeling like, is this person enough of what I want to spend my time with? So it's not, are they perfect? Are they the end all be all? It's like, do they have enough of what will hold my interest and be what I want to spend my time with, my precious time with, right? So like, do I like them enough? It's not like, yeah, so there's that enough piece as well. Like, is what they are, because that's how they're going to be, and you accept the package as it is it enough? Is it enough that I want to spend my time with it? It might be the world to somebody else, but is it enough for me? I have a full life. My work is fulfilling. I have a friendship network. I have my flocking circles, right? Like, I have a son who's soaring, and hopefully will pop in and say hi every now and then on his, soaring journey. Yeah. And I'm not looking for somebody to fix or complete or make my life whole. My life is whole. I am looking for somebody to share that with, right? And I don't even know if it's about sharing all the time, 100% of the time, or if it's about companionship. But I do think it's about enjoying sharing things with people, right? I don't suffer alone. I also don't want to have joy alone,
I think about it too, like supplementing as well. Just, if I'm fine and great and happy alone, is this person going to add to that in a positive way, or,
Exactly.
take away? Yeah. Wow, 3 out of 5 is a lot to be feeling that way with. So I'm curious.
I know.
If you don't mind sharing how you came across these 5 to go on a date with.
Yeah. So how does anybody come across these days, right? On apps, on using technology. So I personally, I don't know if you want me to get so specific as to which app I used, but I'm happy to. I used Bumble, or I'm using Bumble. It's new for me. I must admit that I have such mixed feelings about it. I approach it with a mixture of curiosity and complete disdain. Like, I can't believe I'm actually having to use this thing to find people to date. And at the same time, I wonder who's out there, right? So
Right.
it's such mixed feelings, but I must admit, I also find using apps, although this is the only app I've used, but I can imagine this might be the case with others, that you have to put quite a lot of time and energy into it. And I don't often have that. So my usage tends to go in fits and starts. Like, I have bursts of activity of swiping, and then I don't go on again for 3 months or 6 weeks or whatever the case might be. And so I think that works for me in many ways, because it's sort of, when the spirit moves me, then I get on, and then when it doesn't, I don't. I must admit, I don't have a lot of bandwidth, maybe is the right word. I don't have a lot of bandwidth for a lot of banter back and forth on the app. So if it seems like the person is interesting, I suggest that we meet fairly quickly, because I want to decide fairly quickly. I can discern, like most of us.
Wait. So you invite them on the first date?
Yeah, that's how Bumble works. The woman initiates.
Whoa, yeah, but not for the date. I didn't know that. So what do you say?
No.
What do you say?
So we go back and forth a little. Often they'll say, "Let's meet," and I'll say, "Yeah, good idea." But if they don't say it, I'll say, "Hey, how about a coffee?" I'm not interested in the, I don't have a lot of time.
Good morning.
My time is precious.
Right.
My time is precious. I don't have time for all that. Can I also say the other thing that has been super useful for me? I set my criteria. What is it? Your parameters, like the radius, the geographic radius. I set it at like 5 kilometers.
Wow.
I'm looking for somebody who's an hour away, or even a 45-minute drive. I'm looking for somebody. And the other thing is that, I don't know if it's this way where you live, but where I live, often where you live is a lot of a reflection of your politics, your the way that you move in the world, right? So I'm pretty sure that I'm not going to want to be dating somebody who lives, I'm sorry if I'm missing opportunities with lots of wonderful folks who are out there, but one has to figure out how to narrow down the pool somehow, right? So geographic location has been a big one for me. So that's also been really helpful. And then I think it's just about courage. Just swipe right, and see what happens.
Yeah, that I hear everything you're saying. I think the thing that I wonder about, and I just wonder, is if you make the first move to ask about meeting and coordinating even the meeting, the coffee date or whatever, what message that might say. Liz, you know what I'm trying to ask, and my brain is kind of like fuzzy right now, but the things that we've been talking about, if he wanted to, he would, that kind of stuff. Could you rephrase that for me?
Are you referring more to the more typical roles we expect in that initiating process?
Well, that because we're having a lot of dialogue here in America about effort on Mel's part, where a lot of men now are kind of exhibiting princess behavior, where they want the woman to do all of the chasing, the traditional roles, whatever. And so that if you start down that road, can you ever unravel yourself from it? So do you have any thoughts about that, Sam? Taking the initiative and the so-called masculine role.
Like the planning, the coordinating.
Yeah. I think you're right. So I do think on Bumble, particularly because it's a site set up for and by women, and the woman makes the first move, and there's lots of mechanisms that are designed to give more control to the woman. I do think that men who are on that site, I could imagine if I were a male on that site, I might be a little unsure about what my role is, right? So I I am happy to be proactive, and I am happy to be the one who says, "Hey, let's have a coffee for the first one." I do think that after I've made that initial act of proactivity, um, I would expect the other person to come to the party. And again, if they don't, I don't have time to worry about it too much or even raise it. I just move on.
Mm-hmm.
This hasn't happened to me yet, but I would imagine that this newfound sense of freedom and liberation that I have would be that it's not worth my time.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
No, I'm not here to coach a partner. I do
Mm-hmm.
that in my work.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're still unsure after the first or second date whether or not you should start being proactive, and you don't feel like you can be brave enough to have that conversation with me, then perhaps you need to move on, and I need to move on, right? So I think I'm probably in a space where I'm feeling as though it's not too much of a risk to take. And if it sets the wrong tone and somebody can't course correct after a short while, then we're not right for each other anyway. Um,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, so move
Yeah, that
along.
makes a lot of sense.
Yeah,
That's very wise.
yeah.
I love that we were talking about this because I think a lot of people, even though dating apps now have been around for a couple of years, I think it's still a new thing for many people, and re-entering stages of dating and having to navigate the modern ways. And it's it can be a lot. So I'm sure there is somebody listening to that would find a lot of this conversation helpful. Yeah.
Liz, you just made me think of something. The other
Hmm.
thing I'm finding is in our age group, well, my age group, in the 50s, also the men are also in similar places, right? Of knowing themselves better. Often they are divorced or coming out of relationships that have taught them a whole lot, and they're ready to invest in a different way in a relationship, right? So I don't think it's just women who are looking for something different. My experience is that the men are also showing up differently.
Mm.
Yeah. And I do think, interestingly enough, I think there's more men in my pool than possibly in the 30-year-olds pool, right? Because in the 50-something-year-old pool, it's all of the divorcees, yeah. So I do think that there's real shifts happening in terms of dating pools. So I have
And
a
I
friend in her 30s who's struggling more than I am, I think.
Yeah, and I think for
Mm.
our age group, if I feel like a lot of men, like you said, they've gone through a divorce, and if they were married long enough for their kids to graduate from high school, like a lot of them were, they were out the dating scene too, and they're coming back like, what in the world? Everything is
Right.
completely changed.
Yeah.
And once I realized, okay, it's not this like animosity. Um, between us, I still have to remind myself of that and have compassion that, they're figuring it out too. They're trying to figure
Yeah.
out how do I fit this into my already busy life? How can I make a
Yeah.
good decision on who I might want to spend my time
Right.
um, with everything I have going on? So, I mean, we can go on and on to talk about this, but we can, shift for now. We just had a couple more questions that I wanted to touch on. The question that Liz was kind of saying, I'm going to summarize it into a shorter one, that you've done this work for a long time. You've seen the world shift, either leaning towards compassion or away from compassion. What do you think is going on in your field now? And what do you think will be going on in about 5 years as far as change and growth or lack thereof?
Yeah. I'm also stuck with the way that Liz phrased it, sort of like what's the challenge, right? Or
Yes,
what's
yes, yes, yes.
yeah.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, no, and both feel really useful. Both phrasings feel really useful. So I do think, particularly because of my work in diversity, equity, and inclusion, also in my work with organizational development, and even in my work with flocking, bringing people together. I think the biggest challenge and the biggest threat to this work is the current polarity, the polarization. And I understand that it is fear-based. So this liberal, conservative, DEI versus merit, and, um, DEI versus individualism, and, just all of this polarity, feminine versus masculine. I think my sadness is that it doesn't have to be that way, sort of this notion of both and my sadness and my frustration, and I am complicit in this myself, so I'm not letting myself off the hook here, is that somehow the emergence of something else is such a threat to our way of doing things and our default that we have to try and smash it. Whereas holding the both and, the masculine and feminine, once we embrace diversity, equity, and inclusion, there can be real meritocracy. There can't even be meritocracy until we have leveled the playing field, until we have made conscious some of our unconscious biases, right? So this both and can exist. In fact, it's the only way to exist, which is why I'm trying to get rid of the word but, because that suggests a one or the other, right? And it's really this both and. So I am so frustrated and saddened and heartsore about this inability for us to say, hey, look at this new thing that's just shown up. And I know that part of it is that our brains are wired to be skeptical of that which is different from us, right? It goes back to cave person days where we saw somebody from a different tribe and we said, uh-oh, don't take my food. And, and we were skeptical. But those neurological pathways can be rewired. And we live in a different time now. We have to rewire that. And I feel as though this playing on people's fears is so hurtful and so dangerous. So whipping people up into a frenzy about their fears, and that they're gonna, take away your right to believe what you want to believe. And so yeah, I think pitting religions against each other, and yeah, I'm really frustrated by the polarity that exists, not just in my work, that then reflects in the ways in which world politics play out as well, and what's happening in the Middle East. I mean, there's a part of me, honestly, and I don't know your politics, and I don't know the politics of this podcast, but I sometimes find it hard to even get out of bed in the morning thinking about what is happening in other parts of the world and how we are so insensitive to it, how we just go on with our everyday lives while people are suffering to the extent that they are suffering. I just find it hard. I don't understand how we do that as a creature, right?
It's almost like it's cognitive dissonance.
Yes,
where
completely.
We're living our lives. And it's two ways to think about it, because yes, we have to live our lives. And if we must live our lives, let's live it joyfully. So yes, let's be joyful living our lives. But that does not mean that we turn a blind eye and we don't feel incredibly sad when we see what's going on in the rest of the world. And I think people do the can't hold them both. It's
Yeah,
if I'm going to
exactly.
be joyful, I've got to just protect what's important to me. I've got to just live in my world. And oh, I feel bad about that, but I'm not going to even look at it, address it, or anything different about it.
Exactly. Exactly. I love the way you've brought it back to that both and.
Yeah, yeah. Because
Absolutely.
you just said you couldn't get out of the bed, but
Right.
before you said you're joyful. And I just want
Yeah.
our audience to hear that
Yes.
you can live in both of those worlds at the
Yes.
same time. You know,
Yes.
yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And thank you for that, because I do hold both and I sometimes confuse myself. But that
Mhm.
is growth. That to be able to hold both and is about growing and learning as a human being. To only be able to hold one and one or the other is like an infant, really. It's like a
Mhm.
child. It's a
Right. When you
reptilian
take something from a
brain.
child, they don't even realize it was ever there, so they have
Right.
to see it. Yeah.
Right,
Mm.
right. And funny enough that you should say that, just to bring this back again full circle. It was one of the things that I didn't grow up seeing,
Mm.
because it was very one or the other with my mom. There wasn't space for joy. It was hurt, sadness, frustration, disappointment. I was trying, as a result of this podcast and the reflection I was doing for it, I was trying to remember a time that where my mom was joyful. I couldn't remember an image of my mom
Mm.
being joyful. And so that is what it is, right? For us to be more whole, for us to remember, we need to be able to hold the joy and the sadness, right? Yeah, yeah. And I read something recently about it's only because of our sadness that we recognize joy. Yeah, thank you for
Love
that.
that.
So
Yeah.
powerful.
So I think we're at a tipping point, and I think
Mm.
it's going to be fantastic. I
Mm.
think this is what happens. It's like the dark is before the dawn. And I know that that sounds very cliche and all of that, but part of what I've learned in my own life, and I don't want in any way to minimize the very real suffering that is taking place in the world right now and be like, oh, don't worry, the dawn is coming soon. I don't in any way want to minimize the suffering and the pain that people are going through. And if you look at human evolution and if you look at cycles of growth and transformation, I really believe that we are on the cusp of something. And when we are on the cusp of something, there are always going to be people who push back, right? And
Mhm.
resist. And so I really feel that we are on the cusp of something, a tipping point per se. And what I've learned and what I've also read about is that often when something new is trying to be born, that other things will be put in your way to distract you and to hold your attention and to keep you occupied so that you don't mess with this new thing that's trying to be born and get in the way of it. And I feel as though right now there's a bit of that happening, that we are being preoccupied in some ways with nonsense and with a
Mhm.
holding on to old paradigms, a holding on to old ways of being in the world. Even flocking is a new way of being in the world because we're not competing with each other. We're not trying to see who's best. We're not trying to rank each other and have a hierarchy for each other. We're circling up, right? So it's even a different way of being in the world. It's a different leadership paradigm. So the more people try and hold on to that which doesn't serve us anymore, I think it's just distracting us from this new thing that's trying to be born, and it's going to be born. There's an
Love it. Yeah.
there's an interesting saying about conflict, that conflict is actually a sign that something new is trying to be born.
Amen to
Um,
that, sister.
right,
Yeah, I
right.
mean, both of us, well, all three of us on here, we're in a lot of change right now, and there's conflicts all around, internally, personally, and in the world. And I think that when you are a person who values growth mindset, as we all do, who are willing to take risk, which means you might go through a lot of changes, where you're willing to be different, which means you might always be on the cusp or in a change or just came out of a change, that somehow you have to get comfortable and expect and welcome and almost like embrace conflict. And I think
Yeah.
that's where my learnings or my growth still has to happen, is that if I'm going to be a person who is constantly learning, growing, stretching, changing, then I don't know how I think I'm going to do that without conflict coming. Even just preparing for the move that we talked about earlier. Every day there's a conflict and there's a solve. And I do very well with that when it's theoretical, factual, objective. I still struggle when it's in relationship, in
Yeah.
family, friendship, you know. So,
Yeah.
what's the best piece of advice you've ever received?
Ah, okay, there's two, and
Okay.
I think one of them is this thing of conflict is just something new trying to be born. I think that I had until recently a very negative perception of conflict. It should be avoided, it's not good, people get hurt, it's a sign of trouble. And so it's a real paradigm shift for me to say, actually, conflict is healthy. It can be healthy. I didn't grow up in an environment where conflict was healthy. And so this notion of being attracted to leaning into conflict because something new is trying to be born, especially in the work that I do. So I now do conflict resolution and management, right? And I love it. I'm like a moth drawn to flames, you know. But I don't take it lightly. I tread very, very carefully, and I know how hurtful and scary conflict can be. So I think that is one of the best pieces of advice that I got. And then this is so irrelevant, but it feels relevant to me, and it really is one of the best pieces of advice that I got. And I think it speaks to giving ourselves permission to be human, which I think is what we do in our 50s, or at least what I'm encountering in my 50s. When I first had my baby, an older, wiser friend who'd already had 3 babies said to me, Sam, it is absolutely normal to want to throw your baby out the window. It's just not normal to do it. And I know it sounds silly and it might not be relevant to sort of everything else that we've been talking about, but it feels relevant to me in the sense that it gave me permission to feel frustrated and angry, joyful and loving my baby, and wanting to throw him out the window, right? But I also remember the last piece that said, just don't do it, right?
Right.
So put him down, get somebody else, ask for help, don't suffer alone, right? So yeah, so I think that was I don't think she realized it at the time, and I don't think I realized it at the time. But it's life lessons. It's also okay to want to throw the job out the window, the wife or the husband out the window, the relationship out the window. Just don't do it, you know?
Exactly. Yourself out the
Yeah,
window. You can be so frustrated with being
right,
stuck or doing the same thing or not doing, not eating right or whatever. Just don't
right.
do it.
Yeah,
Don't do it.
yeah,
Find help,
yeah,
flock. I
yeah,
love that word now. We've
yeah,
always were taught
yeah,
freeze, fight, flight, even fawn, but flock is
yeah,
brand new. So you've just
yeah.
given us so much to ponder on. I feel like you've got hundreds of superpowers, but I want to ask you, what do you believe is your superpower?
I think it's the don't suffer alone. I am brave enough to reach out, and I am brave enough to risk saying, I'm struggling, who else is?
Mm-hmm.
And in doing so, I think I give permission for others to be honest, to be open, to be vulnerable. I think vulnerability might be my superpower, to be able to say, Eesh, this isn't working for me, or I'm really struggling. Who wants to join me?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Or can
yeah,
I join you? If they bottom line.
yeah,
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 I love
yeah,
it. And
exactly.
and we talked about what you've done so far. So can you let our listeners know where they can follow your work, get in touch with you if they want to get
Yeah.
involved in any of the wonderful things that you do?
Yeah, please. I think the best place is social media. I do have a website, but I'm often so busy doing the flocking and the training that I don't often update the website with all the events. But I definitely do update my LinkedIn. I post on LinkedIn. So Samantha Stern, Journeys to Remember. So on LinkedIn, on Facebook, I'm stretching myself and getting into Instagram as well, but I haven't quite figured it out yet. So yeah, I think social media, especially LinkedIn and Facebook, are great places. I post all the time about the flocking circles that are happening, and also on, and the diversity, equity, and inclusion training workshops that are happening as well.
So, here it's fall and we're all getting ready to cozy up and go into the winter months. But I know in South Africa, you're actually going into the spring months. So what are you excited about? What renewal might be coming up for you in the future?
Oh my gosh, I don't know. New first dates, and maybe a few more second dates.
Okay.
I was starting to say I'm getting really good at the first dates. Now I need to stretch my muscle at getting good at the second dates.
Second day, okay.
Yeah. So, and I think exciting new projects, like the work that the three of us are going to be doing together. Just meeting new people, flocking with new people. I'm really blessed in that a lot of my work is done with friends, and I think that that's really special. So I feel really blessed that many of my close relationships are people that I've journeyed with for 20, 30 years. But I'm also looking forward to meeting new people and new friendships. Yeah.
Yeah, so you just teased something we're so excited about happening together in the future. We have these podcasts and we listen to people's stories, and we love meeting people and having people hear about them. And we know that sometimes conversations can go on and on and on, but we want to present a space for people where they can have these conversations, but they can feel heard, appreciated, and safe. So stay tuned. We're working on something behind the scenes. Thank you so much, Samantha. We loved hearing your journey. Your journey is going to definitely help us and people who tuned in to remember how special we are, to remember that we have a purpose, to remember to listen to our instincts, to remember to not suffer alone, to lean in, to help, and to remember that it's okay to set up the first date.
Yeah.
That's what I took away from it.
Get out there and start swiping, sister.
Take note.
Yeah.
Right.
What have you got to lose, really?
Right. That's true.
Thank you for sharing what you called your shower thoughts, which quite literally you had a lot of thought in the shower. But I do think everything that you share, I know either myself or somebody else listening to this episode will find very meaningful, impactful, and even helpful to their own lives. So certainly more important than a shower thought, but I am so appreciative that you shared with us. And if there's anything else that you were thinking of in the shower recently that we didn't touch on that you wanted to share, there is space for that, of course. So I just wanted to say that before we end.
No, I think the only thing I would add is to thank you both. Thank you, Liz. Thank you, Fatima, for creating this space. Again, I think it really, it is about coming together, and it's about connection. It's about remembering.
To learn more about today's guests and find related links and resources, visit the episode page at nexusexperience.com. You'll also find our full podcast archive and a free 10-page workbook with 4 powerful journal prompts to help you reconnect with yourself.
If you'd like to support the podcast, please subscribe on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or YouTube. And if you enjoyed this episode, leave a review letting us know. Sharing the show with friends is also incredibly helpful. You can find us at Inside Coffee Break on Instagram and TikTok. For updates, subscribe to our newsletter on Substack via the footer of our website at nexusexperience.com. Today's show was edited by our co-host, Grace Chung. We appreciate your love and support. See you in the next episode.